The metal was cold against Robert Patterson's palm. 2:47 a.m. The garage smelled of sawdust and motor oil. Familiar scents that now felt foreign, wrong. His hands trembled as he turned the Remington over, watching dim light catch the barrel. 67 years old, 43 years married, and here he sat on a wooden stool in the darkness, calculating whether his life insurance would cover more than his treatment. $500,000 if he pulled the trigger. His family saved. Sarah wouldn't lose the house. Emma's medical bills paid, Michael's debts erased. The bullet rolled across the concrete floor, a small metallic whisper in the silence. He picked it up, loaded it. His finger found the trigger. The garage door creaked open. Sarah stood there in her bathrobe, backlit by the hallway light. She didn't boom. Just walked over and sat beside him on the cold floor. Her warm hand covered his. For 5 minutes, neither moved. Then Robert lowered the gun. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, life had been simple. Robert Patterson stood in his garage on a Saturday morning, the kind of morning that defined retirement. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching particles of sawdust floating in the air. At 67, with 40 years at the Cedar Falls post office behind him, he had earned this peace. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen where Sarah hummed while baking her famous apple pie. He ran his fingers along a piece of oak he was shaping into a bookshelf. That's when he felt a small bump on the left side of his neck, just below his collar, rough, slightly raised. Probably just irritation from my shirt, he muttered, rubbing the spot. It didn't hurt. Barely noticeable, really. Sarah appeared in the doorway, wiping flour from her hands. Breakfast is ready, hon. Be right there. He glanced at his reflection in the window glass. The bump was tiny, darker than the surrounding skin, nothing to worry about. His phone buzzed. Emma, calling from Chicago. Hey, sweetheart. Dad, I can't talk long. Big presentation Monday. Just wanted to check in quick. Her voice sounded strained, rushed. That's fine. We're proud of you. Thanks. Love you. Gotta run. The call ended before he could respond. He stared at the phone, then set it down carefully on his workbench. A text arrived from Michael in Denver. Sorry, can't make it home this month. Work is crazy. We'll try for Thanksgiving. Robert typed back, No problem, son. We understand. But did they? Emma was 38, constantly stressed about her career. Michael was 35, always too busy to visit. When was the last time they'd all been together Christmas 2 years ago? The house felt emptier every year. Bob, your eggs are getting cold, Sarah called. He touched the bump on his neck again. It had been there for, 2 months? Maybe 3. He'd first noticed it back in January. Now it was March, and the thing seemed a bit bigger. The edges felt irregular when he pressed on it. You should get that looked at, Sarah had said last week when she noticed him rubbing his neck. It's nothing, just a mole. Robert Eugene Patterson. That doesn't look like a normal mole to me. I've had it my whole life. A lie? He wasn't sure why he said it. The truth was simpler and more embarrassing. He didn't want to bother anyone, didn't want to make a fuss. 40 years of steady, reliable Robert Patterson. He solved problems. He didn't create them. He provided for his family, asked for nothing in return. Going to the doctor for a little bump seemed weak, unnecessary. Sarah worried too much as it was. He walked into the kitchen where she'd set out to breakfast scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, and fresh orange juice. The same meal they'd shared every Saturday for 43 years. "Smells wonderful," he said, kissing her cheek. She touched his face gently, her blue eyes searching his. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" "Of course," Robert said, sitting down. He didn't touch his neck again that morning, but the bump was there, waiting, growing, changing into something that would soon change everything. Sarah didn't ask permission. On a gray Monday morning in late September, she simply announced, "We're going to Matthews. I made an appointment for 10 o'clock. Sarah, I have things to do today. Robert Eugene Patterson. Get in the car." Her voice had that steel edge he'd learned not to argue with after 43 years of marriage. The drive to Cedar Falls Family Medicine took 12 minutes. Robert spent every second of it gripping the door handle, watching familiar streets pass by. The bump on his neck had been there for 8 months now. 8 months of telling himself it was nothing. 8 months of avoiding mirrors, wearing higher collars, brushing off Sarah's worried glances. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and old magazines. A young mother bounced a crying baby on her lap. An elderly man coughed into his fist. Robert studied his shoes, bouncing his knee up and down, until Sarah placed her hand on it to still him. "Mr. Patterson," a nurse appeared in the doorway. Dr. Stephen Matthews had been their family physician for 20 years. A solid man in his early 50s with graying hair and steady hands. He smiled when Robert entered the examination room, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "So, Sarah called ahead," Dr. Matthews said, pulling on latex gloves. "Let's take a look at what's been worrying her." Robert lifted his collar. The lesion had grown to the size of a dime, dark and irregular, with edges that seemed to blur into the surrounding skin. The doctor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Robert caught it, that brief moment when professional neutrality cracked. Dr. Matthews leaned in closer, pulling out a dermatoscope to examine the spot under magnification. The silence stretched too long. "How long has this been here, Robert?" "6 months, maybe 8. Robert's mouth felt dry. "Has it changed in that time?" "Sarah says it's gotten bigger. Darker, too, I suppose." Dr. Matthews stepped back, removing his gloves with deliberate slowness. "Robert, I need to be direct with you. This doesn't look like a simple mole. The irregular borders, the color variation, the way it's raised in some areas, but flat in others, these are concerning characteristics." The room suddenly felt smaller. "I want to do a biopsy right now. Today, I'll send it to pathology with a rush order." The doctor's voice remained calm, but his urgency was unmistakable. "You think it's something serious." "I think we need to rule out more melanoma, which is a type of skin cancer. If that's what this is, catching it early makes a significant difference." But 8 months wasn't early. They both knew it. The biopsy took 15 minutes. Dr. Matthews numbed the area, used a small punch tool to remove a tissue sample, and bandaged the site with practiced efficiency. Robert watched him write "Rush" on the pathology request form in red ink. Results typically take 3 to 5 days. Dr. Matthews said, "I'll call you the moment I hear anything." The drive home was silent. Robert's hand kept moving to the bandage on his neck. pressing gently as if he could feel the truth through the gauze. 2 days passed like 2 years. Robert tried to work in his garage, but his hands shook when he picked up the tools. He started a dozen projects and finished none. Sarah cooked meals that neither of them ate. At night, they lay in bed, not sleeping, not talking, just existing in the terrible space between knowing and not knowing. On Wednesday night, Robert made the mistake of searching online. Melanoma symptoms, stage 3 melanoma survival rate, cancer treatment costs. Each click led him deeper into statistics and medical terminology that turned his stomach. He closed the laptop when he heard Sarah's footsteps on the stairs. Thursday morning, Robert stood in the garage holding a wrench he'd picked up without purpose. The October sun filtered through the window, illuminating dust motes and golden shafts. Everything looked the same as it always had, but nothing felt the same. His phone rang at 9:15. "Robert, it's Dr. Matthews." The doctor's voice carried a weight that made Robert's legs weak. The biopsy results came back. Robert lowered himself onto his workbench stool. Through the open door, he could see Sarah in the kitchen, her back to him as she washed dishes. He wanted to memorize this moment, her there, him here, before everything changed. "It's melanoma," Dr. Matthews said. "Based on the pathology report, it's at least stage 3. The cancer cells have penetrated quite deep. I've already scheduled you for a consultation with Dr. Elizabeth Morrison at the Iowa City Cancer Center. She's one of the best oncological surgeons in the state. Monday at 10 a.m. What does stage 3 mean exactly? It means the melanoma has likely spread beyond the original site, possibly to nearby lymph nodes. Dr. Morrison will do additional scans to determine the exact extent. But Robert, the doctor paused. This is serious. We're looking at surgery at minimum, possibly immunotherapy or other treatments. Robert sat there after the call ended, the wrench still in his hand. Around him, 40 years of accumulated tools hung on pegboards. Projects half finished lined the shelves. Everything familiar, everything safe, everything about to be torn away. "Bob," Sarah's voice came from the doorway. "Who was that?" He looked at his wife of 43 years and felt the words stick in his throat. "It's cancer," he finally said. "Melanoma, stage 3. The Iowa City Cancer Center occupied a modern glass building that gleamed in the Monday morning sun. Robert sat in the consultation room with Sarah beside him, both of them holding hands like teenagers on a first date. Emma had flown in from Chicago overnight. Michael arrived from Denver at dawn. They sat across from their parents, faces pale with worry. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison entered with a tablet and a gravity that filled the room. She was a woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes that had seen too much death to offer false comfort. "Mr. Patterson, I've reviewed your pathology report and the PT scan we did Friday." She turned the tablet screen toward them. The images showed Robert's body in cross-section, with several areas highlighted in ominous bright spots. "The melanoma has spread to the lymph nodes in your neck, 7 nodes here and 1 node under your left arm. This makes it stage 3C melanoma." Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The good news," Dr. Morrison continued, "is that there's no evidence of distant metastasis. It hasn't reached your organs, but we need to act quickly. Surgery first, a wide excision of the primary site and removal of all affected lymph nodes. After you heal, we'll start immunotherapy. The protocol typically runs for a year. What are his chances? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. DeMorrison met his eyes directly. With stage 3C melanoma and aggressive treatment, we're looking at approximately 50 to 60% 5-year survival rate. But those are statistics, not predictions. I've seen people beat worse odds. 50-50, a coin toss between life and death. When can we schedule the surgery? Sarah's voice was steady, but her grip on Robert's hand tightened. Next Tuesday. The sooner, the better. They left with a folder full of paperwork and appointment cards. In the parking garage, Emma broke down crying. Robert held his daughter while she sobbed against his chest. And for the first time in his adult life, he felt completely helpless. The second blow came 3 days later. Robert sat at the kitchen table, opening the envelope from the hospital billing department. The estimated total costs were itemized on 3 single-space pages: surgery and hospitalization rate, $1,000. Immunotherapy treatment, 12 months of 50,000 PT scans. Blood work, follow-up care, 50,000 medications, and supportive care, 43 in total. Estimated cost, $5,000. His insurance would cover $200,000. Patient responsibility, $4,000. The paper slipped from Robert's fingers. $324,000. Their entire retirement savings amounted to $85,000. The house had equity of maybe $180,000 after the mortgage was paid off. Even if they sold everything, they'd still be short nearly $60,000. And that didn't account for living expenses, Emma's student loans, or the fact that they'd be homeless. "We'll figure it out," Sarah said that night, though her voice cracked. "We'll sell the house, take out loans. The kids can help." But Robert had seen Emma's face when she checked her bank account on her phone. She had maybe $12,000 saved. Michael had been even quieter than usual, which meant his financial situation was worse than he was letting on. The surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Robert hadn't slept. He lay in bed watching the clock. 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. At 5:30, Sarah helped him dress. His hand shook so badly she had to button his shirt. At the hospital, a nurse inserted an IV and gave him a mild sedative. Emma and Michael stood on either side of the bed. Sarah held his hand. "I love you," Robert said to each of them. "No matter what happens, I love you." "Dad, don't talk like that," Emma whispered. "You're going to be fine." But her eyes said she wasn't sure. The surgery took 6 hours. They removed the primary melanoma site with wide margins, a section of skin and tissue the size of a silver dollar from his neck. Then they dissected 15 lymph nodes from his neck and 4 from under his arm. DeMorrison came out afterward, still in her scrubs, to report that the margins were clear and the surgery had gone well. Robert spent 3 days in the hospital. The pain was manageable with medication, but the exhaustion was crushing. Every movement required effort. Getting out of bed to use the bathroom left him breathless. Emma stayed those 3 days, sleeping in the chair beside his bed. Michael drove back and forth from their parents' house, bringing Sarah fresh clothes and food neither of them ate. On the 4th day, Robert was discharged. The pathology results on the lymph nodes would take another week. Sarah drove him home carefully, avoiding every pothole and bump. That same afternoon, Emma announced she needed to fly back to Chicago for a crucial presentation she'd been preparing for months. She promised to return the following weekend. "I'll be fine, sweetheart," Robert told her at the airport drop-off. "Go take care of your career. We'll be here when you get back." She hugged him gently, mindful of his bandages, and disappeared into the terminal. 4 days later, Michael's phone rang at 2 in the morning. Robert heard his son's voice from the guest bedroom. "What, when? Oh, God, Mom. Dad." Michael appeared in their doorway, phone shaking in his hand, his face ashen. "It's Emma." She was driving back from the airport. A semi-truck crossed the median on Highway 380. His voice broke. "She's in critical condition at University of Iowa hospitals. They don't know if she's going to make it." Sarah's scream shattered the night. Robert sat up too fast, pain shooting through his neck and shoulder. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the terror that seized his heart. Not Emma. Please, God, not Emma. They threw on clothes and drove through the darkness toward Iowa City. Robert, barely 2 weeks out of major surgery. His daughter fighting for her life in an ICU 60 miles away. When it rains, it pours. Emma didn't wake up. 3 weeks passed in a blur of sterile hallways, beeping machines, and doctors speaking in careful, measured tones. She lay in the ICU at University of Iowa hospitals, her head wrapped in bandages. A ventilator breathing for her, traumatic brain injury, they said, severe swelling. They'd induced a coma to give her brain time to heal. Time. That word haunted Robert now. Time he didn't have. Time Emma might not have. 2 weeks after Emma's accident, Robert began immunotherapy. The infusion center was in the same hospital complex where his daughter lay unconscious 4 floors above. The nurses hooked him up to an IV, and for 2 hours every other Wednesday, medication dripped into his veins, medicine designed to help his immune system recognize and attack cancer cells. The irony wasn't lost on him. His body was being trained to fight invisible enemies, while his daughter's body fought to simply exist. Sarah became a ghost, haunting the space between floors. She'd sit with Robert during his infusions, then take the elevator up to Emma's ICU room. She'd spend an hour there, holding Emma's hand, talking to her unconscious daughter, then return to Robert as his treatment finished. They'd grab terrible cafeteria coffee, then she'd go back up to Emma while Robert rested in the family waiting area. Michael stayed. He'd taken indefinite leave from his job in Denver, though he was vague about the details. He slept in his car in the hospital parking garage most nights, showering in the hospital gym, eating vending machine food. Dark circles ringed his eyes. His clothes hung looser each week. The bills arrived with merciless regularity. Robert's surgery, $180,000. Emma's emergency surgery, $95,000. Emma's ICA care. 3 weeks, $126,000. Robert's immunotherapy. First 2 treatments, $20,000 for total to date. Voltois Insurance covered Robert's surgery, partially $120,000. Emma's insurance from her employer covered $80,000 of her care. That left to $25,000 immediately due. With more accumulating daily, Robert sat in the infusion chair one Wednesday afternoon, watching the medication drip slowly into his arm, and did the math for the 100th time. Even if they sold the house, emptied their savings, it wouldn't be enough. Not for both of them. He closed his eyes and found himself 25 years in the past. Emma was 13, wearing a pink dress she'd picked out especially for her birthday. Sarah had baked a 3-layer chocolate cake. 13 candles waited to be lit. The table was set for 6 p.m. when Robert had promised to be home. 6 o'clock came and went. Emma sat at the table, watching the door. 7 o'clock. The candles on the cake began to droop in the warmth of the kitchen. 8 o'clock. Sarah suggested they eat without him, but Emma shook her head. Dad promised. 9 o'clock. The candles were now puddles of wax on the frosting. Robert arrived home at 11 p.m., his postal uniform soaked with sweat, exhaustion written across his face. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. They needed someone to cover a second route. The overtime pay. It's okay, Dad, Emma had said, smiling through what she insisted was happiness but looked more like resignation. I understand. You work hard for us. She'd blown out the ruined candles and cut the cake. Robert remembered being proud of how mature she was, how understanding. Now, sitting in the infusion chair, with poison dripping into his veins, while his daughter lay in a coma 4 floors up, he finally saw that night clearly the way Emma's smile hadn't reached her eyes, the way she'd turned away when she thought no one was looking, the small death of trust that occurred when a father breaks a promise to be there for the moments that matter. How many moments had he missed for overtime pay, for extra shifts, for money that was supposed to make their lives better, but instead had bought him absence from the life he was working so hard to provide for Mr. Patterson? A nurse touched his arm gently. Your infusion is complete. He looked up, realizing his face was wet. Week 7, day 49. Emma's eyes opened. The call came at 3 in the morning. Sarah answered, listened, then shook Robert awake. She's conscious. Emma's awake. They rushed to the hospital, Michael meeting them in the IC. The doctor stopped them outside Emma's room. She's awake, which is wonderful news, but I need to prepare you. The accident caused significant damage to the left side of her brain. She's experiencing right side paralysis. She can't move her right arm or leg. Is it permanent? Sarah's voice was barely audible. We won't know for certain for several months. She'll need that intensive physical therapy. With work, she might regain some function, but full recovery. The doctor paused. I don't want to give you false hope. Robert walked into the room on trembling legs. Emma lay propped up in bed, her eyes open but unfocused. When she saw him, tears spilled down her cheeks. Dad, she whispered. Her speech was slurred, the left side of her mouth drooping slightly. I can't feel my right side. I can't move my hand. Robert took her left hand in both of his. You're alive. That's what matters. We'll figure out the rest. But the doctor had already given them the figures. Intensive physical therapy, 3 times weekly for at least a year. $85,000. Modifications to make a home wheelchair accessible, $30,000. Ongoing care and monitoring, $45,000. Another $160,000 on top of the mountain of debt already crushing them. That night, Michael sat alone in his car in the parking garage, laptop open. Robert had walked out to bring him dinner and found him staring at the screen. Tears streaming down his face. On the screen, total debt, $287,450. Michael. Robert knocked on the window. His son quickly closed the laptop, wiping his eyes. But when he looked at his father, newly gaunt from chemotherapy, still healing from surgery, now facing his daughter's paralysis, something broke inside him. "Dad, Michael's voice cracked. "I lost my job 6 months ago. I was framed for financial fraud. I didn't do it, but I can't prove it. They're suing me for $150,000. Plus I had credit card debt. I came home because I had nowhere else to go. I've been lying to everyone." Robert stood in the cold parking garage, his son's confession hanging in the air between them. "I can't help with the medical bills." Michael sobbed. "I can barely help myself. I'm worthless. You're dying. Emma's paralyzed, and I'm completely useless." Robert opened the car door and pulled his son into his arms. Michael collapsed against him, shaking with sobs. Above them, on the 4th floor, Emma lay learning to use her left hand to hold a cup. On the 2nd floor, an empty infusion chair waited for Robert's next treatment. And somewhere in Cedar Falls, their house sat with a for sale sign that hadn't attracted a single buyer in 3 weeks. The weight of it all pressed down on Robert's shoulders like a physical thing, but he held his son and whispered, "You're not useless. You're here. That's what matters." Even as he said it, he wondered how much longer he could keep believing his own words. Week 8 brought unexpected news. Robert lay on the examination table while the PET scan machine hummed around him. Morrison reviewed the images on her computer screen, then turned to him with something that almost resembled a smile. "The tumor is shrinking," she said. "The immunotherapy is working. The lymph nodes show reduced activity. This is exactly what we want to see." Robert sat up slowly, the paper gown crinkling beneath him. I mean you're responding to treatment. It's still early, and we have a long road ahead. But Robert, this is good news, very good news." That evening, the Patterson family gathered in Emma's hospital room for the first time in weeks with something approaching hope. Emma sat propped in her wheelchair, her left hand gripping the armrest. She'd regained consciousness 2 weeks earlier and was slowly relearning how to speak clearly, though her right side remained stubbornly paralyzed. Sarah had brought Chinese takeout from the place on Highway 1 that Emma loved. They ate from paper containers, passing around plastic forks, pretending they were somewhere other than a hospital room. "Dad's beating it," Michael said, raising his cup of orange soda. "To beating cancer. To beating cancer." They echoed. Emma smiled, a lopsided smile because of the paralysis, but genuine. "I knew you were too stubborn to let some cancer cells win." Robert laughed, really laughed, for the first time in 2 months. Sarah pulled out her phone and insisted on a family photo. They crowded together, Robert and Sarah on either side of Emma's wheelchair, Michael kneeling in front, all of them smiling like they meant it. "We've gotten through the hardest part," Sarah said as she set the photo as her phone's wallpaper. "It's going to be okay now. I can feel it." Robert wanted to believe her. For one perfect evening, he did. The envelope arrived the next morning. Robert recognized the insurance company logo in the return address. Probably just paperwork, he thought, slitting it open with a kitchen knife while Sarah made coffee. The words seemed to rearrange themselves on the page as he read, "Claim denial notice. We regret to inform you that your claim for cancer treatment has been denied based on non-disclosure of pre-existing conditions. Our review of your insurance application from 15 years ago indicates you answered no to the question regarding chronic pain conditions. However, medical records obtained from Cedar Falls Family Medicine show treatment for chronic joint pain dating back 17 years, per Section 14.3 of your policy agreement. Failure to disclose pre-existing conditions constitutes grounds for claim denial and potential policy cancellation. Total coverage withdrawn. $200,000. Patient financial responsibility. By the letter slipped from Robert's fingers and floated to the kitchen floor. Chronic joint pain. He'd had aching knees and a bad shoulder for years. Took ibuprofen occasionally. He'd completely forgotten about it when filling out the insurance renewal form 15 years ago. A simple checkbox he'd marked no without thinking. That checkbox had just cost him $200,000. His hands shook as he picked up the phone and dialed the number on the letter. The customer service representative who answered sounded cheerful and impossibly young. "I need to speak to someone about this claim denial. There's been a mistake." 20 minutes later, after being transferred 3 times and repeating his story to 3 different people, he got his answer. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Patterson, but the denial stands. You signed a legal document stating you had no pre-existing conditions. Our records show that was not accurate. Per company policy, we cannot provide coverage. I worked 40 years, Robert said, his voice rising. Paid insurance premiums for 40 years, $12,000 a year for 40 years. That's $480,000 I've paid you. And now, when I actually need it, I understand your frustration, sir, but the policy is clear. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Robert hung up without answering. Sarah found him sitting at the kitchen table 20 minutes later, the denial letter in front of him, his face gray. "Bob, what's wrong?" He pushed the letter across the table, watched her face as she read it, saw the color drain from her cheeks, saw her hand move to her mouth, saw the moment she understood what this meant. "They can't do this," she whispered. "Can they? They just did." That night, neither of them slept. They lay in bed doing math in the darkness. "We'll sell the house," Sarah said. "It's worth $220,000. After we pay off the mortgage, that's $180,000. Not enough. Your retirement savings, $85,000. Still not enough." They added it up over and over, as if the numbers might change if they just calculated differently. House equity plus retirement savings, $265,000. Robert's remaining treatment cost $259,000. Emma's rehabilitation and ongoing care, at least $200,000 more. They needed $459,000 they didn't have. "We can't let the kids inherit this debt," Robert said into the darkness. "Michael's already drowning. Emma can't work. They'll be paying this off for the rest of their lives." "What are you saying?" Sarah turned to face him. "I'm saying I stopped treatment." "Absolutely not." "Sarah, no." Her voice was steel. "Don't you dare." The next morning, Robert called a family meeting. Emma had been discharged to a rehabilitation facility. They gathered in her room, Emma in her wheelchair, Michael standing by the window, Sarah sitting rigidly on the bed. Robert explained the insurance denial, laid out the numbers. Then he said the words that had been forming in his mind all night. "I'm going to stop treatment. We'll focus the money on Emma's rehabilitation. No, Emma's shout was loud despite her weakened state. "Dad, you can't give up." "I'm not giving up. I'm making a choice." Michael turned from the window, his face unreadable. Sarah stood up. 43 years we've been married, Robert Patterson. This is the first time I'm going to say that you're wrong. You're completely wrong. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. If you stop treatment, you're not just killing yourself, you're killing us too. Because we'll have to live knowing we let you die. That's the debt you'd be leaving us. And it's one we could never pay off. The silence that followed was broken only by Emma's quiet crying. Robert looked at his family, his wife, his children, and felt the weight of an impossible choice settle onto his shoulders. There was no good answer, only terrible ones. The argument about stopping treatment had been going on for 3 days when Sarah finally broke. It was late past midnight, and Robert sat at the kitchen table with financial documents spread before him like evidence at a trial. Bills, insurance denials, bank statements showing their savings hemorrhaging away. The math was irrefutable. They were drowning, and every day pulled them deeper. Sarah walked into the kitchen in her bathrobe. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Bob, I need to tell you something." "Sarah, we've been through this. I can't let our family go bankrupt." "Stop." Her voice cut through his words. "Just stop and listen." She sat down across from him, hands trembling as she folded them on the table. 15 years ago, I had breast cancer." The words hung in the air like smoke. Robert's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Stage 2. They found it during a routine mammogram. I had surgery, 6 months of chemotherapy, radiation for another 3 months." "What?" The word finally escaped. "That's not you. I never told you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You were working double shifts to pay for Emma's college. Michael had just started high school. You were already carrying so much weight. I didn't want to add to it." Robert stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the floor. "You had cancer, alone, for almost a year." "I wasn't alone. I had the doctors. I drove myself to chemotherapy every Tuesday afternoon while you were at work. I told you I joined a book club." Her laugh was bitter. "Some book club, sitting in an infusion chair, reading magazines while poison dripped into my veins." "Sarah! I wore hats and scarves when my hair fell out. Told you I was trying a new style. You said you liked it." She wiped her eyes. "I was so scared, Bob, every single day. But I couldn't tell you because you would have stopped working those extra shifts. You would have focused on me instead of keeping us financially afloat. And I honestly thought I was being strong, being selfless." Robert moved around the table and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, sobbing. "I was wrong," she choked out. "I cheated you out of being there for me when I needed you most. I made you into the kind of husband who doesn't even know his wife is dying. And now, God help me, you're doing the exact same thing to us." He held her tighter, understanding washing over him like cold water. "You can't protect people by shutting them out," Sarah whispered. "I learned that too late. Please don't make the same mistake." The second blow came the next morning. Dr. Matthews called while Robert was still processing Sarah's revelation. The doctor's voice was grave. "Robert, I need you to come to my office. Today, if possible. There's something you need to know." An hour later, Robert sat across from Dr. Matthews, who had a thick folder open on his desk. "I've been doing some research," the doctor began, "about your melanoma, about where it might have come from." He pushed a document across the desk. "This is a list of 16 people who worked at the Cedar Falls post office over the past 40 years, all diagnosed with melanoma or other skin cancers. 15 of them are dead." Robert stared at the names. He recognized everyone, colleagues, friends, people he'd worked beside for decades. 16 cases from one small facility is statistically impossible unless there's an environmental factor. Dr. Matthews continued, "I contacted OSHA. They've had complaints about chemical exposure at that facility dating back to 1995. The mail sorting chemicals, the cleaning solvents, the fumigation protocols, all of them contain carcinogens. They knew." Robert's voice was hollow. "They knew. There are internal memos, risk assessments, safety complaints that were filed and ignored." Dr. Matthews slid another document forward. "This is from 1998. It specifically mentions elevated cancer risks and recommends protective equipment and ventilation improvements. Nothing was done." Robert looked at his hands. 40 years of sorting mail, 40 years of breathing in chemicals, touching treated paper, washing his skin with harsh industrial soap, 83,000 hours of exposure. "They killed me," he said quietly, "and 15 other people. They just killed us slowly enough that nobody noticed." That same night, 90 miles away in a cheap motel outside Des Moines, Michael Patterson sat on the edge of a sagging bed and counted pills. 30 white tablets lined up on the nightstand, Ambien, enough to make sure he never woke up. He'd driven here after the family meeting, after seeing his father's determination to sacrifice himself, after admitting his own crushing debt, after realizing he had nothing to contribute except more burden. His phone buzzed with texts he didn't read. Jennifer wondering where he was. His mother asking if he was okay. Emma checking in. He couldn't help any of them. Couldn't help his dying father or his paralyzed sister. Couldn't pay his debts. Couldn't even keep his job. The life insurance policy would pay out $250,000, more than his worthless living self could ever contribute. He picked up the first pill, swallowed it with tap water from a plastic cup. Then the second, the third. They went down easier after that. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty room, to his family, to himself. By the time he swallowed the 30th pill, his hands had stopped shaking. He lay down on the bed, closed his eyes, and waited for the darkness. 2 hours later, Jennifer, who had tracked his credit card to the motel, kicked in the door and found him barely breathing. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. They pumped his stomach in the ER. He survived. But that same night, at 2:47 in the morning, Robert Patterson sat in his garage with his grandfather's revolver, the insurance denial, Emma's paralysis, the revelation that the post office had poisoned him, Sarah's secret cancer, Michael's debt, and now the phone call from Jennifer. Michael's in the hospital. He tried to kill himself. All of it crashed down at once. The gun was heavy, cold, final. If he died, the life insurance would pay $500,000, tax-free, enough to save everyone except himself. His finger moved to the trigger. The garage door opened. Sarah stood there in her bathrobe, backlit by the hallway light. She didn't gasp or scream, didn't say his name or beg him to stop. She simply walked over and sat down beside him on the cold concrete floor, put her warm hand over his. They sat like that for 5 minutes, 10, neither speaking. Finally, Robert's grip on the gun loosened. His shoulders began to shake. Then he was crying great, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and ancient inside him. "I can't do this anymore," he choked out. "I'm not strong enough." Sarah pulled him against her shoulder. "Then let me be strong enough for both of us." And she took the gun from his hands and set it aside, held him while he broke apart, held him while he put himself back together. And when dawn finally came through the garage windows, they were still there, still together, still alive. Michael opened his eyes to white ceiling tiles and the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. Jennifer sat beside his hospital bed, her face pale and tear-streaked. When she saw him wake, she grabbed his hand so tightly it hurt. "Don't you ever do that again," she whispered fiercely. "Do you hear me? Never." The door opened, and Robert walked in, moving slowly, one hand pressed to his healing surgical site. He looked 20 years older than he had 2 months ago. The immunotherapy had stolen his color, his weight, his vitality. But his eyes were clear as he approached his son's bed. "Dad!" Michael croaked. His throat burned from the stomach pump. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Robert sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. "Tell me why you did it." "Because I'm useless." The words tumbled out. "You're dying. Emma's paralyzed. I can't help either of you. I can't even help myself. I owe $300,000 for something I didn't do. I lost my job. I lost everything. I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought my life insurance would at least give you something." $250,000, Robert said quietly. Michael looked away, ashamed. "You know what that would have cost us?" Robert leaned forward. "It would have cost us you. And son, there isn't enough money in the world to make that an acceptable trade. Oh, but I can't help. You can help by being here, by being alive." Robert's hand closed over Michael's. "I don't need you to be a hero. I don't need you to fix everything. I just need you to stay. Can you do that?" Michael nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll stay." "Good." Robert stood slowly, wincing. "Because I've decided something. I'm not giving up. Not on treatment, not on this family, not on anything. If we're going down, we're going down fighting together." The knock on their front door came 3 days later. Harold Thompson stood on the porch, a thin man of 70 with kind eyes and work-worn hands. He'd been the Pattersons' neighbor for 23 years, living in the blue house 2 doors down. "Harold," Sarah said, surprised. "Come in." "Can't stay long. Just wanted to bring you something." He held out a white envelope. Robert emerged from the kitchen. "Harold, good to see you." "Heard about your troubles?" Harold said simply. "The cancer, the bills, the insurance mess." He pressed the envelope into Robert's hands. "This is for you." Robert opened it. Inside was a check for $200,000. His hand started shaking. "Harold, I can't. This is—" "You can and you will," Harold said firmly. "This isn't charity. Robert, This is a debt." "What debt? I don't understand." Harold's eyes grew distant. 20 years ago. My boy Danny was 8 years old. We were at Lake McBride. You remember?" Slowly, Robert nodded. The memory was hazy, filed away as unimportant. "Danny went out too deep," Harold continued. "Started drowning. Everybody on the beach was screaming, but you were the only one who moved. You dove in with your clothes on and pulled him out. Did CPR right there on the sand until he started breathing again." The memory sharpened. A small boy, blue-lipped and terrified. The feeling of ribs under his hands, the sound of water coughing from small lungs, the boy's eyes opening. The paramedic said another 2 minutes, and he would have had brain damage. Harold said, "Another 5, and he would have died. You saved my son's life. It was just anyone would have—" "But they didn't. You did." Harold's voice was rough. "I tried to give you money then. You refused, said it was just the right thing to do. Well, now I'm not asking. You saved Danny. Now I'm saving you. Harold, this is your life savings. And what good is it if I can't help the man who gave me my son back? Danny's 30 now, married, got a baby girl. I get to be a grandfather because of you." Harold's eyes were wet. "Take the money. Robert, let me do this one right thing." Sarah was openly crying. Robert couldn't speak. He just pulled Harold into an embrace. 2 weeks later, Harold Thompson died of stage 4 melanoma. He'd worked at the Cedar Falls post office for 35 years. He'd known he was dying when he wrote that check. His funeral was the largest Cedar Falls had seen in a decade. But Harold's gift was just the beginning. Morrison's coffee shop on Main Street put out a donation jar with a simple sign, "Help Robert Fight Cancer." The owner, Betty Morrison, who remembered Robert delivering her mail every day for 40 years, always with a smile, always on time, started it with $100 of her own. Within a week, the jar held $12,000. Bethel Community Church, where the Pattersons had attended for 30 years, organized a car wash fundraiser. The entire congregation turned out. High school kids washed cars for donations. The youth group sold baked goods. Elderly members who couldn't wash cars sat in lawn chairs and greeted everyone who came. They raised $8,300 in a single Saturday. Michael's former players from the youth baseball league he'd coached years ago heard about the situation. Teenagers now. They organized a bake sale at Cedar Falls High School. They made cookies and brownies and lemonade, setting up tables outside the school entrance. $3,200. The Postal Workers Union, despite some members being angry about the potential lawsuit, took up a collection. 47 current and retired postal workers contributed what they could. $15,700. Emma, from her rehabilitation facility, set up a GoFundMe page. She typed with her left hand, slowly, telling their story. The response was overwhelming. Strangers from across the country donated $20 here, $50 there, $100. A woman in Oregon who'd lost her husband to melanoma gave $500. A man in Florida who'd survived cancer donated $1,000. In 2 weeks, $18,400 from 340 people they'd never met. Robert sat at his kitchen table reading every comment, every message of support, and wept. "I didn't know," he said to Sarah. "I had no idea people cared." "You spent 40 years caring for this community," Sarah replied. "Every day, rain or shine, You delivered their mail. You showed up. Now, they're showing up for you. Total from community support, $57,600. The lawyer's name was Thomas Wright, and he specialized in class action lawsuits. Mr. Patterson, I've reviewed the documentation Dr. Matthews provided. The OSHA complaints, the internal memos, the pattern of cancer cases. Wright leaned back in his office chair. You have an airtight case. The Postal Service knew about the chemical exposure risks and did nothing. How long would a lawsuit take? Sarah asked. 18 to 24 months, typically. Maybe longer if they fight hard. And they will fight hard. Robert looked at the stack of medical bills on Wright's desk. What are we talking about in terms of settlement? For wrongful exposure resulting in terminal illness, with 15 deaths already documented conservatively, $2 to $5 million, possibly more. Emma, who'd come to the meeting in her wheelchair, spoke up. What about the other families, the 15 people who died? We'd file a class action. Each family would receive compensation. We're talking about a $40 to $50 million total settlement range. Will his former co-workers hate him for this? Sarah asked quietly. Wright nodded. Some will. They'll say he's biting the hand that fed him, that he's betraying the Postal Service. It won't be easy. Robert thought about Harold, dead at 70 from the same chemicals. Thought about 15 names on Dr. Matthews' list. Thought about future postal workers who might face the same fate if nothing changed. I'll do it, he said. Not just for me, for all of them. Wright pulled out the paperwork. Then let's make them pay for what they did. That evening, Robert and Sarah recalculated their finances with Michael and Emma present. Harold's gift, $200,000. Community fundraising, $57,600. Home equity, if they sold $180,000. Retirement savings, $85,000. Total available, $522,600. Needed for Robert's treatment. $524,000. Needed for Emma's rehabilitation. $200,000. Total needed $724,000. They were still short $200,000. But the bank, seeing Harold's contribution and the community support, agreed to a loan with the house as collateral. $200,000 at 6% interest over 15 years. If they won the lawsuit, they could pay it off. If they lost, they'd lose the house. We're betting everything, Michael said. Robert looked at his family, Sarah, exhausted but determined, Emma, paralyzed but fighting to recover, Michael, alive when he could have been dead. Then we'd better win, Robert said. For the first time in 3 months, he felt something he'd almost forgotten hope, not the naive hope that everything would be fine, but the hard-won hope that comes from deciding to fight even when the odds are terrible, the hope that comes from discovering you're not alone, the hope that comes from finally, letting people love you. 2 years after his diagnosis, Robert Patterson stood in a federal courthouse in Des Moines and heard the words that changed everything. The court finds in favor of the plaintiffs. The United States Postal Service is hereby ordered to pay compensatory damages in the amount of $2.8 million to Robert Patterson, and a total of $47 million to be distributed among the families of the deceased and affected workers. The gallery erupted. Sarah gripped his hand. Emma, now walking with a leg brace and cane, hugged him from the side. Michael stood behind them, tears streaming down his face. The Postal Service had fought hard. Their lawyers had painted Robert as ungrateful, opportunistic, a man turning against the institution that had employed him for 40 years. Some of his former co-workers testified against him. At the grocery store, 3 people here he'd known for decades turned their backs when they saw him. "You took the hand that fed you for 40 years and bit it clean off," one former colleague had said, loud enough for half the produce section to hear. It hurt. But Robert had looked at the list of names, 16 people, 15 dead, and knew he'd made the right choice. The money came 6 months later. After appeals were exhausted, Robert used it to pay off the bank loan, cover Emma's ongoing therapy costs, and settle Michael's debt completely. They bought a smaller, more manageable house on Willow Street, comfortable but not extravagant. The remaining $1.5 million went into a foundation. The Patterson Hope Fund was born 10 years later. On a bright Saturday morning in May, Robert Patterson stood in his kitchen at 77 years old. His hair had gone completely white. Deep lines creased his face, earned through a decade of continued immunotherapy, monitoring, and scent. But his eyes were clear and bright, his hands steady as he poured coffee. "Grandpa, can I have pancakes?" A small voice piped up from the doorway. Lily Bennett, 12 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her grandfather's stubborn chin, padded into the kitchen in fuzzy slippers. "I think that can be arranged," Robert said, ruffling her hair. Sarah appeared moments later, carrying a basket of fresh eggs from the chickens they now kept in the backyard. At 75, she moved with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to cherish every morning. "Is everyone coming today, Key?" she asked. "Emma and David should be here by noon. Michael's bringing Jennifer and the kids around 1. Sunday dinners had become sacred. Every week without fail for 10 years, the Patterson family gathered. It was the one rule Robert had made when he'd survived the 5-year mark, no matter how busy life got. They showed up for each other. Emma arrived first, walking with only a slight limp now. 10 years of physical therapy had restored most of her mobility, though her right hand still didn't have full dexterity. She worked as a counselor for trauma survivors, using her own experience to help others navigate their darkest moments. Her husband David helped her from the car. Their son Jake, 8 years old, ran ahead to hug his grandfather. Michael pulled up 30 minutes later, his wife Jennifer in the passenger seat. Their 2 daughters, Sophie, 6, and Emma Jr., 4, bouncing in the back seat. "Sorry we're late," Michael said. Sophie couldn't decide which shoes to wear. Robert pulled his son into a hug. Michael had gained back the weight he'd lost during those dark months. He worked as an accountant in Cedar Falls now, making modest money but sleeping soundly at night. He'd been in therapy for 9 years, learning to manage the depression that had nearly killed him. The house filled with noise and laughter, children running through rooms, adults catching up over coffee, the smell of Sarah's pot roast filling the air. Robert stood in the doorway watching his family and felt something that had eluded him for most of his 67 years, complete peace. That Monday, Robert drove to the Patterson Hope Fund Community Center on East Market Street. The building had been purchased 3 years ago with foundation money. Inside, there were consultation rooms, a small medical library, support group spaces, and offices for the 2 full-time staff members who ran the operation. But Robert was there as a volunteer, same as he had been for 8 years. Thomas Bradley sat across from him in one of the consultation rooms, a man of 62 who'd just been diagnosed with stage 3 melanoma. "I don't know how I'm going to afford treatment," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "My insurance will only cover half. I'll lose my house. My wife—" He couldn't finish. Robert leaned forward. 10 years ago, I sat exactly where you're sitting. Stage 3C melanoma, 7 positive lymph nodes. My insurance denied my claim. I had a daughter in the hospital from a car accident. My son tried to kill himself because he felt helpless. I sat in my garage one night with the gun in my hand." Thomas looked up, shocked. "I'm telling you this because I want you to know I understand, not theoretically. I've been there." Robert slid a folder across the table. "The Patterson Hope Fund was created to help people exactly like you. We can cover 75% of your treatment costs, and we'll connect you with legal support if your insurance denial is questionable." "Why?" Thomas asked. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because a stranger did it for me," Robert said simply. "A neighbor named Harold Thompson gave me $200,000 when I had nothing. He died 2 weeks later. I can't repay him, but I can pass it forward. In 8 years, the Patterson Hope Fund had helped 340 families, $4.2 million distributed to people fighting cancer without adequate insurance." That afternoon, Robert drove to Oakwood Cemetery. Harold Thompson's grave sat beneath a large oak tree. The headstone read, "Beloved Father, Friend, Hero, 1935-2010. And Robert placed fresh flowers in the holder and sat on the bench nearby. 10 years. "Harold," he said quietly, 10 years cancer-free. They don't call it remission anymore. They call it cured." The wind rustled through the oak leaves. 340 families now. That money you gave me, it didn't just save me. It saved hundreds of people. Your gift multiplied." He stayed for a while, watching sunlight filter through branches, feeling grateful for neighbors who become family, for second chance, for the ripple effects of kindness. That evening, Robert and Lily sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the twilight. "Grandpa, Mom said you were really sick once," Lily said. "I was, sweetheart, very sick. But you got better." "I did, with a lot of help." "From who?" Robert thought about the answer. "Sarah, who refused to let him give up. Emma and Michael, who gave him a reason to fight. To Morrison, who treated his body. Harold, who saved his life with generosity. The community that rallied. Strangers who donated to a GoFundMe. Thomas Wright, who fought for justice. From everyone who loved me," he said finally. "That's the secret, Lily, the real secret to surviving anything." "What is?" "Letting people love you, even when you think you don't deserve it, even when you want to handle everything alone. The bravest thing you can ever do is let someone else be strong for you." Lily leaned against his shoulder. "I'll remember that, Grandpa." Robert put his arm around his granddaughter and watched the fireflies dance. He'd lived to see his children heal, to hold grandchildren, to help hundreds of families face their own darkest hours, to turn his suffering into something that mattered. Harold had given him $200,000 and told him it was paying back a debt. But the real debt, the one Robert would spend the rest of his life repaying, was to every person who'd refused to let him face cancer alone. 10 years after a melanoma diagnosis that should have killed him, Robert Patterson was finally, truly, Robert Patterson's story isn't really about cancer. It's about a man who spent most of his life believing that strength meant carrying everything alone, that love meant never becoming a burden. He almost lost everything, including his life, before he learned the most important truth. Real strength is having the courage to be vulnerable with the people who love you. How many of us have ignored that strange symptom because we don't want to bother anyone? How many times have we said, "I'm fine," when we're drowning? We work hard our whole lives, provide for our families, and somewhere along the way, we forget that being loved means letting people care for us, not just caring for them. Robert discovered that when you finally let people in, when you stop pretending to be invincible, something miraculous happens. Love multiplies, community shows up, strangers become family. The very thing you feared most, being a burden, becomes the bridge that connects you to everyone who matters. Here's what I want to know. Have you ever pushed people away because you didn't want to be a burden? And looking back, do you wish you'd let them help share your story in the comments? Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.